Gege says the biggest factor for Gojo's defeat is that Gojo let his guard down. After defeating Maharaga, Gojo thought that Sukuna had no way to bypass his affinity anymore. I think that the usual Gojo would have sensed that something was amiss and could have avoided a fatal wound. Gege Akutami is the author of JJK, and somehow, even 6 months after the manga has come to an end, he still figures out a way to troll his fan base, the community. This is hilarious. He basically said to everyone that if Gojo would have locked in, he wouldn't have lost against Sukuna. Oh, I love this man. I love Akutami. He's hilarious. Actually hilarious, because when you factor in everything, okay? The Sukuna versus Gojo fight was such a big area of conversation for basically a year plus. Honestly, up until the final chapter of the manga, it was a big discussing point. And it caused even a lot of people to drop the series because of just what happened within it. I mean, to be fair, Sukuna, Gojo, iconic titans within the series, them going at each other, one side was going to just be completely upset. And let's just be completely blunt, Sukuna had to win because he was the big bad, and obviously our main cast like Yuji, for instance, had to go up against Sukuna. So, there was never a chance in hell that Gojo was going to win. He was fighting against the plot itself. And I think indirectly, this is Gege Akutami saying that, Gojo was, in normal circumstances, he would have won. But because he was fighting the plot itself, or God himself, aka Akutami, he never stood a chance. But there is obviously some more implications to this that is very fascinating and gives some more insight into why Gojo lost. But this isn't the only thing that Gege Akutami actually let us know. For one, that's really fascinating about this whole ordeal is that we come to find out a little bit more about Megumi's relationship with his sister and why it was written like it was. It was based on Rukia from, Bleach. We even have information that Angel was apparently a sorcerer from the Middle East. There's some interesting stuff here, a lot of lore implications, and honestly, this makes me hope that maybe one day we might get a continuation of some kind, maybe a part 2 of JJK or something, because there is a lot of potential still within the JJK verse to expand upon things, not just, let's say, on Yuji, but other characters within the story. But let's back up for a second, and let's talk about the main elephant in the room, which is Gojo versus Sukuna. And I think this is a big one that everybody's going to be talking about, and a lot of people are going to be shocked about. But obviously, at the end of the day, a lot of people were pretty salty that Gojo lost. And it makes sense when you factor in everything within the story and what it tried to paint Gojo as. Gojo was an extremely powerful character. Up until his very introduction, he was always proven to be just basically OP. He had infinity, and there's a reason why people always bring Gojo into power scaling discussions against Goku or other characters, and I'm not going to get into who's stronger or whatever, but what I will say is there is a reason why there is a lot of power scaling discussions with Gojo. He is a fan favorite character. There's a lot of people that love him, a lot of people like his personality, the way he's presented in the manga, and it's been very obvious for a long time that Gege Akutami did not like Gojo. I mean, he even said it in his offer comments while the manga of JJK was coming out, and I've talked about this a lot in my chapter reviews of the manga. But the point I'm getting at is that there was a lot of people upset with the conclusion of Sukuna versus Gojo's fight, that Gojo should have won. And I, myself included, actually believe that Gojo should have won, especially with just how the chapter was done. At least the way it was presented and how Gojo went out, it felt like there was like a page or two kind of missing, and that was a big discussion point for a lot of people when that chapter went down. But even if we disregard that, Gojo losing like he did felt very cheap, because it's like, if he had to lose, at the very least, there should have been more damage done to Sukuna. But after the fight with, Gojo versus Sukuna, Sukuna pretty much kind of shrugged it off, mostly. That's what we kind of saw. It seemed like he wasn't really that damaged, and he seemed to be even stronger than he was when he went up against Gojo. And so it made the fight look really bad. It made it look like Sukuna wasn't really trying to begin with, and Gojo was just basically getting humored the entire time, even though it was very clear throughout the fight that there was many points where Gojo was basically doing a 3v1. He was fighting multiple entities at once by himself against Sukuna. I mean, the summons, like for instance, Maharaga, for instance. So, there was a lot of people upset with the conclusion, and it makes sense, because if, for example, Sukuna didn't have Maharaga, Gojo probably would have won. That was a big thing that a lot of people talked about. And so, finding out now that Gege Akutami himself even admits that under normal circumstances, Gojo wouldn't have lost, is funny. It's actually funny because it pretty much gives clarity to what the fan base has been saying for a very long time, but we need to talk about why he lost. Why did Gojo not lock in, which gets fundamentally into his very character, which I already kind of briefly showed it actually when I was scrolling through the tabs, but it's this. This is a very good example of it. Basically, we have it to where Sukuna deals a surprise attack on Gojo, who was assured that his affinity couldn't be bypassed anymore, and he had to let his guard down, but he would have usually avoided it. There's also more examples of this. For instance, there's examples within the very manga that Gojo lets his guard down, and he does get hit by certain attacks. We have seen this. I mean, Kenjaku seals him, to Toji stabbing him. We have seen this example of Gojo letting his guard down to a certain degree, or thinking he's won, and then he basically faces the repercussions of it. And pretty much when it came to Sukuna's fight, it was basically the third strike, he's out. There was no recovering. You know, he decided to let his guard down against a very person that was basically the king of sorcery, the king of curses, basically. So it makes sense when you factor in the character traits of Gojo, he always did have this flaw. And now that Gege Akutami basically implied that Gojo would have won in normal circumstances if he fully focused, actually makes me enjoy the fight a lot more. It actually makes me look at the defeat of Gojo with a better viewpoint than I did when I first read it. And it's crazy. I mean, it just took these brief moments to really come to terms with it and be like, you know what, that makes a lot of sense now. And you know what? Even though I still think Gojo shouldn't have lost because of everything, he was handicapped a lot, I think I actually now look a little bit more fondly back to this fight. It's a good thing. Actually, I've got to say, this redeemed the fight in a lot of ways, in my personal opinion. But, one thing I will say about the whole thing is that, Gege somehow, despite the series being done for over 6 months now, almost 7 months, he still somehow manages to make people talk about his story. In such an engaging way at that. I love it, man. He's a unique author. I've already talked positively about the conclusion, the extended ending, you know, where we got to see Sukuna added and stuff. It wasn't perfect by any means, but I do think that it did a lot better of a job than what it originally ended off with. I do hope that if there's anything to take away from all this information that we got, I do hope that maybe we get a part 2 of JJK eventually. I would love to see, you know, Akutami explore the world more, because honestly, there's a lot more potential that could be had, and a lot more characters that could be explored too, besides obviously just following Sukuna, or Gojo, or Yuji. I mean, hell, we don't even really know Yuji's domain expansion. I don't think we even ever got that. That's what blows my mind. But I'll leave it at that. I wanted to bring this to people's attention. This was very fascinating, really interesting lore and all that came out literally yesterday. And I know there's a lot of people that are unaware of it. So yeah, Gojo should have won. From the man himself, from the author himself, his own mouth, Gojo would have won. There we go. Finally have the conclusion to that topic. Be safe, stay healthy, love you guys. Chibi out.